Good morning, Angie. Welcome. I'm so glad that you're joining us this morning. It's Saturday morning, right before the Christmas parade, and appreciate your time and to be here with us. Angie joined us on October the 12th for our conference on the impact of privatizing public schools, a crisis in the making. And one of the things that we realized right away that was too many brilliant people on the stage and not enough time to get through the material. And so we've invited our panelists to come back and join us individually in a webinar series we're having this fall to allow us to discover more fully some of the issues around what's going on with our schools in terms of privatization, as well as it's just the overall healthiness of our public school system. And Angie joins us from Wake County. She's a nationally board certified high school social studies teacher in Wake County. She was a former North Carolina teaching fellow back when the program was very strong and very robust. She was recognized as Wake County's first Teacher of the Year in 1994 and a school level honoree in 1999. Angie has earned her master's degree before becoming a police wife and a mother. Her open letter declaring we should all support public schools by wearing red for Ed on Wednesday. I have it on this morning in honor of Angie. Led to the founding of Red for Ed in North Carolina in 2003. Coincidentally, the same time that Public Schools First NC opened its doors too. So it's been a very productive 5-6 years now, Angie.
We've been busy.
We also got to know Angie through the documentary called Teacher North of the Year. Teacher of the Year was incredible film, Angie, and I hope you'll talk about it someplace along the line today. But when I first saw it, I literally remember just sitting quietly after I saw the film and just being feeling very emotional to see the heart and the passion that you put in your profession and to see the disappointments that teachers are feeling in the classroom right now. In terms of their profession and how they feel personally in terms of their accomplishments. So I won't give that all away because you'll be talking about today. But if you have not seen Teacher of the Year, you should. If you'd like to host it at your school, let me or Angie know because we'd love to come show this film. But since that time, Angie has been involved with Public Schools First. She's on our board of advisors, and she's also a director with the Wake chapter of the NCAE. She's a graduate of UNC Chapel Hill, and she was awarded the Excellence in Teaching Award from Chapel Hill last year, and that was quite an honor. Very, very proud to see that you were recognized by Chapel Hill for graduating from their School of Education, and then years later being sought out as an excellent teacher must have really made you very proud. And hopefully made your parents feel good about, hopefully your parents felt very happy about the investment they made in your education when they saw that you were being so recognized for your achievements. But Angie, today
I want to clarify though, if you think about it, my parents didn't invest in my education, the state of North Carolina did.
True.
So the state of North Carolina should feel really proud that they invested in a teacher who has remained in the profession for 27 years and received that award. So I give all the credit to a enlightened policy.
Well, so in a minute, I'm going to turn to that program, and I want you to explain to us how that worked, how the funding worked, because you're absolutely right. But we're going to start off by taking just a few minutes to talk about the topic of the day, or the foundation of our conversation, which is all about school privatization. And a lot of people, Angie, ask me what we're talking about. I can remember probably when we started in 2013, and we would talk about this concept of corporate takeover of our schools and how well-funded business leaders and corporations were interested in owning or taking over the running of our schools or pushing government out of our schools. And people would look at me with kind of a glazed look. We fast forward now to 2019, 6 years later. I think things are changing. I think people are beginning to understand that there has been a concerted effort um, toward using our public tax dollars to invest in private schools and for-profit entities. And I wondered, as a social studies teacher, you have probably a unique perspective on this in terms of the materials that you present and teach your kids. Did you want to kind of share anything about this issue of privatization and how you see it being accomplished? These are some of the things that we listed here: charter schools, virtual schools, private schools, education savings accounts, school takeovers. And some people ask me, why would you call disrupting the teacher pipeline a privatization tool? So maybe you could talk about this a little bit.
Yeah, this is actually going to be the center of kind of what I've prepared to speak about today, and that is, I really think that in the 1980s, we really had a love affair with the idea of neoliberalism and how our personal fascination with markets and choice and that greed is good and our self-centered concern for ourselves and our own families led us to think that by picking competing in markets and kind of pursuing private choice, that we somehow were going to help boost a public good. And I think that now that we are a generation out from that, we're finding out that actually those markets are not actually serving us well. And what I'm excited about talking about today is they're not only not serving our most vulnerable children well, they're also not serving our middle class and privileged children well. And so privatization really seems to serve the interests of just a very, very few who might be seeking economic advantage or profit or those kinds of things through our schools. But for the vast majority of Americans with children, I'm going to try and make a case that our interests are not being served long term through the continued almost balkanization of our education space.
Okay.
And there's economic and moral and social reasons why these trends really are problematic.
Okay, and before you get started, I just wanted to flip this slide up really quickly, because this is what we put together, the conference, and Angie, thank you for participating. This is what we put together, the conference, to kind of summarize what has happened in the last 10 years. The General Assembly majority became controlled by the Republicans in 2010, and then so we were looking at the pre-recession to now, and to try to determine, kind of what has gone on the last 10 years. And we can see quickly, I won't read all of these, but you can see some of the things that have changed. And one of the things you talked about, and I know I don't want to dwell on it too much, but you did talk about this this opportunity that you have for Teaching Fellows program. And back when it was offered, when you were in young woman, Angie, there was a full ride, right? There was 4-year
Yes.
full scholarship.
Yes. Very important
And
for me and my family that scholarship came about when it did. And it was my full intention to only teach for 4 years. That's all that was required by the scholarship. And I had every intention of teaching my 4 years and then leaving and becoming something better paid, I suppose. And then I realized that teaching was my true passion. I've been teaching for 27 years. So it really was a pretty good investment. And it's interesting, the teachers in the classroom who are most active and vocal and seem to have the best handle on the systemic situation that's going on in the state. I mean, a lot of them are teaching fellows from the same time period when I was in that program. And I'm excited that it's come back in some sense, but it's a very limited, narrow, focused, and different
well, one thing
program
that
than it is now.
concerns me about it is that it is not as robust. It is smaller, and they do have it limited to very few schools, and none of the historically Black colleges or universities are qualified to be in the program. So that to me is a real issue around equity and
Absolutely.
involving making sure we have diversity in our teaching force. So that's been really disappointing. But the real big things about privatization, you can see we're not spending as much money. We've taken away, we've hit the profession pretty hard. We've taken away master's pay, career status. We're reducing health benefits for retirees. We took the cap off charters, which is go, go, go on charters. We're up to 200 and some. We've allowed vouchers. We now put scarlet letters on schools and teachers. We're doing takeover of schools. We've almost every tool in the privatization toolkit has been applied to North Carolina. And so it has left many school systems on their on one knee, uh, in terms of being able to compete for keeping their funding and to keeping their teaching force. But Angie, I want to turn the uh, screen now over to you
Okay.
and let you take us on this journey that you've been working hard on to talk to us about today.
All right. Thank you so much. I I need to make sure that this transition is going as well as we hope. Can you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Okay. And so I think I need to get into presenter mode on my end here. And is that what we're looking at?
Sure, that's
Yes.
fine.
Okay. So I feel like I need to breeze through what we've already covered and start here. Is that right, Yvonne?
Yes,
Is that
ma'am.
looking
Yeah,
good? Okay,
you're
great.
doing good.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I am really thrilled to be here with you all today. And that introduction made me almost feel like I know what I'm talking about. So it's good to it's good to remind myself that I've been with Yvonne since 2013, and we have been working very hard in a lot of different ways to advance the conversation on public education. I want to talk a little bit about the perspectives I bring to this conversation and also the work that I do. It is limited, as all of our perspectives are, and that's why it's important to have a lot of people in a room whenever we're talking about policy areas as complex as education. I particularly am excited when I look at conversations or uh, public events that have been led lately by Nicole Hannah-Jones. If you don't know who Nicole Hannah-Jones is, she's a really important thought leader in education right now. And what I'm excited about her is she is a woman of color, a journalist, extremely well educated and articulate, and has a really amazing grasp on current trends in education. And she's come to the conclusion that school choice is actually damaging in that we need to recommit ourselves to inclusive public schools that are diverse and cross racial and class boundaries. And I love how she doesn't let us get comfortable about the choices we are making if, in fact, they don't serve the needs of all children. And I'm also excited about her conversations because they challenge us is also that I come to the same conclusions, but on a different track. And so it's almost as if we're arriving at the same station, but we're coming from very different tracks to the same conclusion, despite the differences in our race and to some degree regions of the country which we lived in and those things. And so I am excited to talk from my perspective about the same issues and come largely to the same conclusions despite a very different background and orientation to learning about the issues. So in some ways, she and I come, and I'm in no way I'm trying to put myself on any kind of equivalency of intellect and inspiration as Nicole Hannah-Jones. Let me be that very clear. But one thing I love about her, and I think that we have in common, is that we both are historians. I am a social studies teacher I've taught American history for 25 years and also African American history. And I really do feel like these conversations have to be really informed by history and that perspective. And then also what I love about Nicole Hannah-Jones is how she thinks big at kind of what I call the 30,000 feet level of looking at really big ideas and carrying us at that level to some large conclusions. And that's kind of the way I think too. I think of myself as a big thinker. Some of my colleagues on Red for Ed NC who serve on the advisory board, they're so good at a very detailed level analysis and fact checking and those things. I'm more comfortable in a space where we're just kind of pulling together large trends and ideas in ways that come together in powerful ways. So I like that she thinks at that level as well. And then also I think she and I are similar in that we do not come from a history of generational privilege. My grandmothers were textile mill workers at minimum wage, and I have seen the ability of my family to grow wealth over generations largely through home ownership. But I think that that's an important perspective that we share as well, in that we have had an opportunity to see people in different spectrums of class and wealth, and also communities that are both rural as well as suburban and urban. So I think it's also important, though, that I'm coming at today's webinar and coming to the same conclusions in some ways, Nicole Hannah-Jones, about choice, but with a different lens as well, because I grew up in largely white, suburban, southern cities, including Houston, Atlanta, and now Raleigh. And so I'm kind of, while Nicole Hannah-Jones is kind of the first generation of people in her family who was fully infused with a full complement of civil rights as a result of the civil rights movement and changes in law. I'm probably a manifestation of an entire life lived in somewhat isolated white suburbia, okay? And that was a choice that was made by my family and parents, and I'm now able to reflect on it as an adult and think about the ramifications of that. I was very lucky. I grew up in a two-parent home, amazing parents, hardworking parents, loving family. And so I think that perspective is important in what I'm saying today as well. I also grew up in an anti-union, conservative-ish home, where we focused a lot on our home, our family, and we did not focus a lot, I would say, on community organizations, community involvement, political activism, or anything kind of related to larger, what I'll call people power movements. I will say that. A very hardworking family with lots of hours of labor involved. Okay, so what I want to talk about today is the 1980s and how I feel like the 1980s were really a pivot point in our culture in terms of elevating this idea of markets and choice. So when I teach history and I look at the 60s and the 70s, I see a lot of people power and people crossing boundaries of race and class in some ways to build movements that yielded political power. So I'm looking at unions, and I'm looking at the civil rights movement, and the civil rights movement included both a lot of Black and brown and white people working together in important ways to bring about fundamental change on the ground. And then I was born in 1971, but I really feel like I grew up as a conscious, aware person in the 80s. And I think that what I recall about life in white suburbia in the 1980s was this idea of greed is good. You might remember the Michael Douglas claim of that, but there was this sense that markets were going to save us. This was the age of Reagan and trickle-down economics. And there was this idea that we needed to all pursue our own self-interest. And in doing so, we would make choices economically that would elevate kind of a survival of the fittest idea, and that the best, the entities that were providing the best customer service, the best opportunities, that those would rise to the top and best serve us all. And so we really began to romanticize the idea of choice and participating in markets in a self-centered way that would, in some ways, serve the greater good. and grow the economy and those kinds of things. At the same time, I sensed in my parents and in a lot of people in my community this very much a control focus, where we really wanted to control the environments of our children. We really wanted to control what schools they went to. The biggest fear that I lived in the 1980s in my suburban hamlet was school reassignment. School reassignment was something that I feared. I didn't want to go to different schools. My parents were very much in agreement that that would have been a disaster for me to have to attend a different school, and we were ready to entrench and fight any effort to do that. But also just a control focus in terms of what kinds of activities we were involved in, where we went, who we were with, all of those things. And I'll get also to this idea of security. There was a security focus as well to my upbringing. There was also, as I said, an individualistic focus. We were not very involved in community organizations. We were involved in, say, a church community, but there was very much a sense that we were working hard to provide a standard of living for our children and our home and care for our home and our yard and keep up with um, the neighborhood standards, those kinds of things. And I just don't remember a huge focus on, say, reaching out to other communities, reaching out for political or social causes. And so there was also that kind of individualistic focus to life in the 1980s when I grew up. I also recall in the 1980s there was this sense of the report A Nation at Risk came out in 1983, and it talked about how our schools were actually creating a security risk because they were so ineffective. And I saw within my schooling a movement towards what was called time on task, where we quit doing activities that weren't mission focused on academic learning of content, and there were less and less assemblies and fewer social times for social interaction within the school, and a lot more focus on bell-to-bell instruction, standardized testing, measuring who was qualified, defining in a very narrow way who is smart and who is qualified. And despite the fact we know now that there are 7 to 9 unique types of intelligence, ways in which people can be intelligent, we elevated just a few of those to being worthy of testing and focus. And so mathematical, logical thinking was elevated, verbal, written and oral language was elevated, but other types of soft skills and other types of intelligences related to social intelligence or soft skills and cultural competencies of being able to cross boundaries of race and class and interact, those things were not really a focus of what intelligent people were capable of doing. And then there was also a huge security focus that began in the 1980s and has continued since then of kind of a fear that, we started putting registered sex offenders and being very aware of where they are. And we were starting to reap um, the fact that we had disinvested in our central cities for so long, and there had been white flight from our central cities, that we had developed um, ghetto-like conditions within our inner cities, and that had led to artistic art forms like of the rage of that, including rap music and other influences. And there was this sense that we needed to sort ourselves or protect ourselves. This was also the time of the rise of gangs in the inner cities and crack. And there was this sense that we needed to sort ourselves and circle the wagons and ensure that our children were safe from any influences that might in some ways be unsavory. It's kind of funny looking back on it though when I think about the kind of music I was listening to in the 80s or the kinds of video and movie and audio influences. There were definite limitations to the ability to which you could create a secure insulation, I guess, around your children. And then there's this famous report that came out, or article called Bowling Alone, which talked about how we really have, during that time period, we just disinvested from civic organizations. And we're seeing that even still, where in the case of Bowling Alone, the idea is that bowling has gone up. There's more bowling games being played, but everyone's bowling by themselves. The bowling leagues and the community that was set up around an activity like bowling. But also you see this with Lions clubs and all kinds of civic organizations, this kind of disinvestment from those organizations during this time period. So it's within that context that I grew up, and it's within that context that I think that a lot of the charter school voucher movement came out of. And I even remember thinking, both as a youth and as a young teacher, when school choice became a new idea, I remember not thinking of it at all as a problem. I remember thinking of it as very seductive, and of course, that's a great idea. Competition is always good. Choice is always good. What could be bad about that idea? And it very much fit in within kind of a romanticizing of markets and choice that had a steady diet of that throughout my upbringing and into my early career days. And so when my principal at my high school indicated that he felt that the choice movement was going to be a threat, a existential and fundamental threat to the work we were doing in my school, I thought he seemed kind of paranoid, and it was very uncharacteristic for him to be that way. He tended to kind of pick his battles and see waves that were worth riding and waves that were not. And so I just didn't see how school choice and vouchers and those kinds of things was going to develop. But we actually see this, the negative implications of this trend in a lot of our other institutions, not just educational institutions, but we also see it most, there's this fragmentation and balkanization that began to happen in the public space, where people who were not happy with the institution they found themselves in it gave them an opportunity to just break away and form a new thing. And so that's a lot of what drives the school choice movement, is if parents aren't happy with reassignment, or they're not happy with their perception of what is going on in the institutions around them, they just break off and form a new one. And we've seen this in religion, especially in the Christian faith in America. We now know that in our Christian communities, when we had a disagreement about doctrine or about format of services or those kinds of things, the result is that people just broke away and formed their own thing. And so now we're looking in our religious communities at 42,000 different denominations of Christianity, none of which are doing particularly well, and a general lessening over the years of people who are actively participating in those denominations. And we're kind of realizing the limitations of competition and choice, and how actually they might not serve the greater good. And our religious communities are really struggling in that. The way I know that is that my own faith community we rent a sanctuary in a large church that actually used to be very large and had 3 sanctuaries, but now we rent one of the sanctuaries because that large church has declined in membership over time. So if what we see in, of course, our churches are purely private institutions, and if they're any indication of what privatization and choice is going to do to the strength of institutions overall, and our ability to participate in them and sustain them, it doesn't bode well, I would say, for our educational institutions, because as Yvonne and Public Schools First NC has shown us here, that kind of balkanization and fragmentation is clearly on the rise. So these are some slides that Public Schools First has put together, and you can just see that here in Wake County, where I teach, for example, we have almost 15,000 students now that have broken away from the public school system and are now attending a variety of different school choice options and charters. We also see that this trend is only growing. We have 6 more charter schools opening in Wake County in 2020. one of which I believe, at least one of which is a K-12 school. So if you want to talk about people who don't want to deal with reassignment and they want to exert control, that's a very seductive way to do that. I'm not sure it's going to serve children's interests long term, but it certainly plays into that control focus that was something that was important in my life growing up. So you can just see the rise in the total number of charter schools in operation between 1997 and 2021. There's a huge growth in these schools, and there's a lot of money that is also being invested in these schools, and we'll talk a little about the economic implications of that as well. So all of these just generally show a buy-in to this school choice movement. And despite the fact, and we'll talk about this a little bit too, that these schools may market themselves as superior or better alternatives to public education, but their performance does not really follow through with that in terms of typical measures of performance. So that's interesting as well, is the disconnect that seems to exist between parents' perceptions of these institutions and then the actualities of them. So I want to talk a little bit about the negative externalities of these choices that are not often spoken of and given voice to, sometimes largely because the public schools are not focused on marketing and branding like some of our schools of choice are. So the first thing I want to talk about is how when we create schools of choice, we forfeit economies of scale. And when I think about a K-12 charter school opening up in Wake County, I'm amazed at how that could possibly serve, especially the interests of high school students, very well, because we have a need, in my comprehensive high school of 2,600, we have multiple AP courses offered, upwards of 7 or 8, I believe, in just my department alone. And these are college level courses that students can receive credit for in college if they perform well on the AP exam. And so it's really important that teachers who are teaching those courses are really familiar with those courses. They've taught them for a while. They might have an opportunity to serve assessing exams in the summer, opportunities to actually help be a part of the assessment. And it's important that you teach those classes multiple times and you really become an expert in them. And so when I'm starting to think about charter schools that have fewer students in them, what that means is that class sizes might be small, but also teachers might be teaching just one section of a course every few years instead of intensely and regularly. And what that means is you've got teachers with a lot more preparations of courses that they are having to prepare to teach, and they're teaching those classes less often. So that means that they're constantly in what I would call a preparatory mode of coming up with lessons, coming up with assessments, coming up with materials. And that creates an incredible amount of bandwidth, which then cuts into their ability to, say, provide feedback, take up work, assess that work in a important and high quality way. And so those economies of scale of just having enough students in a school to be well staffed and offer a lot of sections of important coursework is something that you may not think about as a parent, but I assure you are really helping or shape the time and attention that teachers have within the school building each day. The other thing I notice about that's a negative externality of choice is that parents have become very confused about what the choices for schools are when they move into especially a metropolitan area like Wake County. Suddenly they have to navigate this huge landscape of charters, magnets, private schools, public schools, year-round, traditional calendars, base schools, and it's just a lot to navigate. Parents can be quickly confused about what their options are. They might not have an opportunity to tour every school that they want, that they're considering. And so there's just a choice paradox that breaks out. And a lot of these parents are two-income parents working, And so their ability to engage in this discernment process of what all the possible schools are and what their strengths and weaknesses are and how they can arrange transportation and those things, it becomes really quite a challenge. One that could be avoided if we simply committed ourselves to having great public schools in every community. That confusion can then lead to arbitrary selection, where parents go to a nicely groomed tour. They look at some very carefully created brochures, and they can start making selections of their child's school based on very little actual information about the academic program, how the school, how the curriculum relates to prevailing educational theories of pedagogy. And instead, they use very arbitrary measures to select the school. And I have talked to teachers at charter schools. Another issue with charter schools is that teachers do not have freedom of speech. They have no due process rights. They can't speak forthrightly about the conditions at their school or problems at their school. If they do that, they can be dismissed. So there might be deep-seated, persistent problems within the school, but you can't pick up on those in a tour, and no one is talking about them. And so you might have problems with understaffing. Another problem we see with charter schools is a few families might control the school, because once you get a child in the school, the siblings of that child have automatic preference on admission. And so you can get just a few families who exert an incredible amount of influence within the school and kind of drive the school program. There might be issues of like lack of custodians. There might be all kinds of issues that might be latent and hidden under the radar, and parents are very unlikely to find out about them just because of the nature of that it's a private institution, and employees are limited in their ability to speak publicly and frankly about those problems. There's also a lack of fiscal accountability in these schools. We don't have all of the reporting and auditing and processes that previously have existed in public institutions. And so we're seeing a lot of cases where we have unusual contracts being awarded to people who are invested in the charter management corporation of the schools, and the normal bidding processes and all of those things are not necessarily being attended to. And the oversight of charter schools by the Department of Public Instruction, there's more and more charter schools all the time. And we really feel like in the Department of Public Instruction that department is understaffed to do really any consequential and deep oversight of these schools. The other thing I'll say that a lot of people don't think about when they think about schools of choice is how public schools are democratic institutions that are run and policies are created by popularly elected leaders. So if you're not happy with your school or the directions in which it's going or decisions that are being made about the schools, you can unelect and elect new people to make decisions and policies related to the schools. Charter schools are overseen by boards, some of which the boards may be educators, they may not, but they are not elected popularly. Also, if your child attends a public school, they have due process rights that are very much tied to the protocols that must be followed when you are disciplining students or dealing with complaints or issues related to making sure that the needs of disabled students are met and that they are provided proper accommodations. You forfeit all of those due process opportunities when you attend a charter school. And a lot of people don't realize that the solution for people who are not happy within charter schools is to just leave the school. The problem with that solution is that then students come back to the public schools to be educated, but they bring no dollars with them. After the first 10 days of school, we count our students and are issued a certain amount of money to educate our students for the year. But after those 10 days, if students move back to their base schools, they come with no money. And the charter schools actually then get to keep the money. So having public schools is like the schools of last resort. In some ways is truly problematic. And also the fact that you have limited options in terms of how to shape your charter school if in fact you are unhappy with its governance or with the disciplinary procedures or special needs accommodations that are being made. And then in looking at charter schools, I've also had the opportunity to find out just the opportunity costs that come with charter schools. There are some charter schools who've made commitments that their teachers will be paid at a certain level. And while that is admirable, a lot of times it then requires an incredible amount of raising of money from private sources to fund these schools, maintain salaries at certain levels. So there's just an incredible amount of private money, charity money, that's being poured into these schools, both for capital improvements, um, since they don't receive money from the state to build buildings and those kinds of things. And what that means is that that's money that's not going into the public schools. And we're foregoing a lot of opportunities to elevate the public schools and invest those funds in those schools that would serve all students. And there's also a lot of replication of capital investments. We've built schools and done the capital investments, and so we should use any private monies to help enhance those institutions, not build totally separate, different institutions. So that brings with it huge opportunity costs. And then another really important negative externality of choice that I want to focus on is how we're actually disadvantaging our children when we create institutions that further create lines of division in terms of race and class. In an effort to make our child more qualified for, say, college admissions or those kinds of things. Let me speak frankly about this. I, in some ways, feel like my upbringing in suburban kind of isolation with a large amount of children that looked and acted just like me did not well equip me for my professional life or adulthood. And I've had to do a lot of remediation in my own life to make up for the lack of soft skills and cultural intelligence that I did not develop in my younger years. So, for example, I, as a teacher, it's important in my professional career that I be able to cross boundaries of race and class to reach my students. And ideally, I would have been in a lot more spaces in my childhood and in my adolescence that weren't white spaces. I would have been better served in terms of being able to advance in my profession and be more successful in all the things that I do if I'd had an opportunity to be in communication and relationship with more Black and brown people, and be in spaces that were not white dominated spaces, and have a better understanding of multiple perspectives, learn better how to code switch. Code switching is where you adjust your speech, or you adjust your actions, or those kinds of things to better fit in with whatever social context you find yourself in. And I've had to just embark upon in my life a kind of personal remediation to make myself more capable of navigating professional and public spaces. So I had to embrace the opportunity to, say, for example, teach African American history just to help myself understand the history of Black and brown people in our society. And so what I want to present, and I've had to keep doing that even now in my own work and with Red for Ed, is understanding that we're going to gain power through people power, and really finding common ground with people across race and class and cultural boundaries and geographic boundaries to some degree. And my ability to do that has really been hindered by this kind of early cultural isolation that I experienced, I would say, within the suburbs. So when I think about my own children, and Nicole Hannah-Jones came to the same conclusion about where she wanted her children to go to school. And when I think about where I want my children to go to school, I'm really elevating the importance of a diverse school community as being the best choice for my children and their long-term interests. Because moving forward, starting as soon as 2040 or 2050, we're going to be a majority minority society, meaning that people of color, Black and brown people, and all other minority groups are going to numerically outnumber white people. And so, for my child's future success in life, it's going to be really important that they be able to navigate these cultural competencies and have soft skills and perspectives that allow them to really communicate well and interact well across boundaries of class and race. And I'm not sure that putting them in a school that I might deem as super safe or super academically high achieving, where it reinforces separations, as so many schools of choice do. They really reinforce separations in terms of race and class. I'm not sure that I'm actually serving their long-term interests well. I do not believe my long-term interests were served well by those choices that were available to my family and that they took. And so I am excited to come to that conclusion, because that's the same conclusion Nicole Hannah-Jones comes to, that we really need to recommit ourselves for lots of reasons, economic, social, and political, to the fact that we need to reinvest in common institutions with our time and our treasure. And we need to rebuild a true community, broad-based community institutions with a common sense of purpose that will help us build true people power, which is key to healthy democratic governance within our system. And so that's my thoughts about growing up in a neoliberal choice is good life, and why I think it would serve us all well, especially our children well, to reinvest in our public schools and reinvest in a sense of community-based democratic institutions. So that's what was on my mind and heart today. I'm not sure if I articulated it particularly well, but I would love to talk more, take any questions, and speak more about anything that wasn't particularly clear in my comments, but I know that we're moving on with time. And so that's what I wanted to talk about today.
Excellent job. And especially I love the way that you're taking your professional knowledge also in terms of being a history teacher, a social studies teacher, civics, economics. I can imagine the courses that you've had to teach over the last 27 years.
All of those, yes, all of those. Sociology, yeah, all of them.
Right,
It really,
psychology. Yeah, as a social scientist, you get all 8 or 9 of those courses. But it gives you a unique professional training experience as well as a life experience, because you also have children in the school system right now, Angie, which I think gives you a great perspective of, I'm trying to be this view from in my classroom, and I'm looking at these kids, and I also come home and I have my kids to think about. And, I thought it was fascinating how you talked about how deeply involved parents became in the 80s. I grew up in a time before you. And one of the things I think was fascinating is that my parents actually thought we moved every year. My father was in the military. And so I went to school at a different school almost every year till high school. And if it hadn't been for Vietnam, I probably would have skipped around in high school. But my parents actually saw this as a good thing. We were living different places. I was meeting different kids. I was, going different. And in my classrooms, in terms of being in the military, I had lots of different types of children from all over the world in my classes. And this was seen as a very positive thing. When I got to high school in Fayetteville, North Carolina, and it was a segregated high school, I was in shock. It was a very different environment that I'd ever been in. It was actually the reverse of what happened to many people. Instead of moving into a more integrated, as I went through school system, I went back to segregated. And it was very hard. And what I saw was a lot of uh, kids my age were not, I kind of back then was kind of rude in my thinking probably, but I felt like the folks around me were unworldly. I'm like, they did not understand a lot about people of color. They did not understand about languages and cultures, and seemed to have a lack of interest. And I remember just feeling really isolated in high school. But
Yes.
what I find fascinating in terms of parenting is how the whole concept of parenting in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s henceforth has changed.
Yes.
And we even have the terms helicopter parents, right? Because that for a
Yes.
reason, in terms of, and I think the undo, what I think I saw with my parents was whatever it is what it is. You move here, these are your schools, you go there. There
Yes.
was really no concept of choice, or that my parents were personally responsible for my education.
That's right.
They saw my
Also,
education as a responsibility of the school and the teachers and the community.
that's right. And also what they wanted to engender in you, which I think is really key, is an adaptability that allows you to be very resilient. Okay. And I think that part of our control focused parenting style lately has created children who are not very adaptable and therefore not very resilient. And that's why we have these runaway rates of anxiety and depression. And so, what I'm really trying, and what I think is so, here's another point I want to touch on. I just read this morning on Facebook about a public school where these fights broke out. And the police were involved and some students were charged. And a comment was made by a person, well, this is why we need schools of choice. I want you to know, as a public school teacher who's broken up a fight or two in my life, that the only children hurt in fights are the kids who are fighting and the adults who are breaking those fights up. Okay? But the children who are hurt by resegregation and creating these limiting environments that don't allow children to become adaptable, create soft skills, learn how to interact with other children, and cross these racial and class boundaries, that is going to hurt your kid long term and in serious ways. And so I think that those same parents who are so concerned about the fight at school and how it might hurt their child, if you ask them how they're limiting their access to videos on the internet, do they not allow their child to drive a car because their child might be injured by a crazy driver on the road? No, they don't limit their children in any other way and try and protect them in any other way from the supposedly bad influences in society. So it's just super arbitrary, I feel like, how parents make choices and how they rationalize them. And I think that it's important to just really step back and think about what your children really need to be successful and healthy long term, professionally, personally, psychologically, developmentally. And I really do think that the environment you grew up in, Yvonne, actually achieved that purpose better than maybe the my upbringing that was very different from yours and was focused on parental control and choice.
And adaptability is a very important concept. I show the film Resilience a lot. I had a high adverse childhood experience ACEs score myself, but what I was able to procure during my growing up years was strong, caring adults who taught me how to adapt, to cope, to strive under most adverse circumstances. And you're right, this is a concept that we're trying very, very hard to get across to educators and teachers and principals and parents, that that children do experience a lot of anxiety. And one of the ways that we need to help them is by teaching them how to be resilient. And that's not something you can do in isolation. It's not teaching them to be adaptable in one part of their life. Just, it's being adaptable in all parts of your life. Being able to communicate is key to that, and having trust is key to that. So anyway, building relationships, right, with in a diverse setting. But Angie, you made me think of something really interesting. A couple of weeks ago, I had a parent say to me, I think that what we should start making school systems and charter schools do in their brochures or their descriptions of programs is talking about it in an open, transparent way. To say we offer a diverse school environment, we offer cultural and social experiences. We are proud that we have emphasis on understanding race and religion throughout the world. That we actually, she actually felt like we shy away from talking about that, and in fact that we ought to be encouraging parents to pick our public schools because they offer this wonderfully rich opportunity to learn life, and while in a as a young student, that will help you have the skills you need in college and in workplace in the future. So I wonder, maybe she's onto something. Maybe we're just not talking openly and honestly. And Nicole Hannah Jones does make us do that about the issues of class and wealth and race, and encouraging parents when they think of being super parents, wonderful parents, but they're not. They got to add a few variables to their list when they're making these choices about where their kids go to school. So are public schools the best choice? I mean, are do they serve the common good? Is that something that parents and taxpayers and voters should care about?
Absolutely. And as much as I have reflected a little bit on my upbringing in suburban, predominantly white schools, let me just talk about the excitement of what I see in the public school I teach in every day. Um, I have my students, they sit in teams, they work together, they solve problems. We work on soft skills of assuming roles and coming to conclusions, making decisions, reporting them out. It's so fun to watch kids cross uh, uh, different boundaries of race and class in a public school and come to understand each other better. I'm in a trailer in the school bus parking lot, and at the end of the day, when the kids all come down to get on the bus, you just see kids, incredible energy, and they're all talking with each other, and they're all laughing, and it's almost, it's just brilliant. It's looking at what America can be, the promise of America that has always existed in our most important founding documents, but has never existed on the ground. So to the degree that you believe that America should be a land of equal opportunity, and to the degree that you believe that America should be a meritocracy, where we all really do have an equal and unfettered start, then you can't have that if you don't have strong public schools in every community. And so if you want to wave the flag and you want to be patriotic, a true patriot, then you have to commit yourself to strong public schools. First and foremost, there's nothing more important than that. And I get to see that every day outside the window of my trailer. And it's a beautiful, powerful, and fascinating process. And with great teachers who not only take those students in that building that are diverse, but then create learning opportunities that really get them engaged and interacting, that's also really important. Okay. A school that's diverse where all the kids go into classrooms that are segregated,
That doesn't work.
that's still not meeting the ideal that we as democratic institutions need to be meeting. So we're working on that, and we're making progress, and we need to continue working on that. But certainly those schools are much more capable of meeting those ideals than some schools that have resegregated themselves by race and class just simply based on the fact they don't offer transportation and they don't offer free and reduced lunch, and they struggle to accommodate disabled students. and therefore may not be a place that really has many disabled students.
Well, we talked about adverse childhood experiences for a second, ACEs. You would probably not be surprised to know that the 2 or 3 strongest variables for high school students where you teach in terms of trauma, toxic stress from trauma, comes around bullying and racism, and other forms of anxiety and mental health issues. And of course, parents ask me all the time, so you cannot protect your children against those things, but you can invest in helping your children navigate those things. And you can advocate for your school to have strong restorative justice programs, strong anti-bullying, strong programs on understanding and dealing with racism. So I think the retreat and exit out of the public school system seems really comfortable for some parents, but actually in the long run, it is not helping their child deal with any of those issues. They will still have those issues in life and in the workplace. But I am concerned about the lack of helping professionals in the schools, Angie. And I know that I wanted to talk about that just for a second, because you are in the epicenter of what's going on. In Wake County, we've had the highest suicide alerts that we've ever had since I've been keeping track of these numbers. And suicide alerts for the public is something that's elevated to very serious. It's when a child reports themselves as suicidal, or a teacher or a classmate or a parent. It's the highest level. So when we see these rising, and we understand that the resources you have as a teacher in your school are very limited. One of the things that we're just starting to do in Wake County is we don't have a social worker for every school. We don't have a school psychologist. We have counselors who are overwhelmed with just trying to get in college applications. We don't have nurses. So when we look at the issues that are affecting our children, we don't have helping professionals in our schools to help teachers. Teachers can't do it all. You try to give medication and be a nurse and be a psychologist, but our kids really need more services from helping professionals.
Yes,
what's going on in your school?
Yeah, I want to touch on that. We're a high school of 2,600 people. We have one. It's a small town. We have one person who is not actually a full-time like counselor. So I mean in terms of like mental mental psychological issues that students might have, or a social worker. She kind of does this role where she tries to bridge both being a social worker and a mental health counselor. And as you can imagine, she's entirely overwhelmed. I asked her one day, how many of you would there need to be to actually meet the needs of the students in this school? And she said, 5. 5 more.
Mm-hmm.
There's one of her.
Right.
And she says we need 6 in this school to actually meet. And what she's having to do, which is tragic, you can imagine how hard it is to be her every day. She's just doing triage. She's never, ever getting to actually help students in a systematic, long-term way. It's just firefighting. Just who's the most in crisis today, and is never able to really bring kids in and in a fundamental way help them develop strategies, coping mechanisms, plans to actually deal with whatever the trauma is. It's like someone coming in with their arm coming off, and you just keep putting Band-Aids on it because you don't have anything else to offer that day.
Well, one of the things that we know is that experts recommend, and I started my career as a social worker, that we have a social worker for every 750 kids. In Wake County, a good friend of mine has an elementary and a middle school. She's the social worker. She has 2,185 kids. Okay, one social worker, 2,185 kids in the wealthiest county in the state. And so people were saying to me, so why are we having so many mental health problems and issues with our kids? It's there are several theories, but one fact is that we have fewer and fewer health choices in the community. That we have a lot of families without health coverage, and if they do have health insurance, they can't afford the copays and the
That's right.
deductibles. So we have a lot of
Right.
children and their families who are not getting mental health and physical health services in the community. So these are kids are showing up in school lacking the resources they really need. So a lot of times when we talk about these issues, and also it is the issue of the time, right? You and I did not grow up with social media where a picture of us could, bring it, be posted all over the internet,
That's right.
making fun of our hairstyle,
Right.
right?
Right.
We did not have
And
these the same kind of instant information about each other and
that's right.
instant sharing.
Yes. And that's why if you really look at one thing that frustrates us teachers a lot is how much focus there is on salaries. It seems that the media just keeps driving this narrative that we are super focused on salaries. Now, I'm not going to say that it wouldn't be nice to, you know, increase wages or at least receive the same salary increases as other state employees, or for our bus drivers, for heaven's sakes, to at least get the same minimum wage as all other state employees. But that's why I wanted to expand Medicaid. If you look at our 5 demands that we had for May 1, how many of them were related to salaries? Well, expanding Medicaid would help address so many of the issues that you just spoke of in terms of why our students can't seem to access the mental and health services that they need. Two, um, it's why we are so fascinated by what the Chicago teachers unions were able to receive up in Chicago as a result of a 9-day strike, which was extremely disruptive. But if you look at what they got, they they were fighting for their students to have counselors, nurses, um, smaller class sizes, so that we can actually give one-on-one attention to our students. And so these are the working condition on the ground kind of issues that teachers really do care about because
Because it makes the classroom more successful, right? If you have social workers
absolutely
who are not only connecting children directly to services, but families, but who are
right,
also helping teachers understand how to deal with
right,
issues of racism and
right.
bullying in the classroom, helping teachers understand how to be culturally and socially sensitive.
That's exactly right.
So teachers need training in staff development too. They're
Oh, that's so
not
true.
psychologists. They're not social workers.
Right. If I look at part of what really drives me insane is my husband is a police officer and I'm a teacher. So, and he used to be a teacher, but now he's a police officer. So I get to compare his level of support, training, pay with mine. And despite the fact I have 10 more years of experience than him in my profession, he's already far surpassed me in pay. He's also has every possible physical resource he needs to do his job. He has more than he needs to do his job. His biggest problem sometimes is we have all this money we have to spend. We need to find something we need. These conversations drive me insane, as you can imagine. But also, they have amazing training, incredible training. They are being developed as professionals. He went through implicit bias training to help the police officers better understand the differences between overt racism and systemic racism. And it has been a really important conversation that's going on in the Raleigh Police Department. And great strides are being made in the minds of these officers at the very capable hands of Cassandra Jack Brown, I will add. And I think, why don't we have professional development funds for our teachers to be learning these very important cultural competencies?
Because we're
Because,
underfunded, because
right,
we're
but
spending
we're
our
on the
limited
front line.
dollars
We're on
on
the front line of
gasoline. Yeah,
we're on the front line of the school to prison pipeline.
right,
And while we need to make sure that we have appropriate consequences for students in our schools, we also need to make sure that as teachers, we know the difference between aggression and non aggression,
right,
between how different uh, cultural communities express themselves in
right,
healthy and totally fine ways.
right.
So, and what's sad is a lot of teachers are having to remediate themselves and teach themselves these things, sometimes through their own professionally funded personally funded professional development, but also through learning the hard way. And you know what learning the hard way means when you're a teacher is that you make mistakes and then you're called on them and you hurt kids and you have to figure it out. And the cost of that to teachers psychologically and to students and to families is very high. And it causes us all to have less confidence in our classrooms and in our schools. And
Okay, so
so
we need
a
to wrap
dollar invested in professional development now is invaluable. And to see
up.
how my profession does not have those dollars and other professions do is really frustrating to me.
Well, and that's one of the things that have been going on for the past decade. We saw lack of classroom resources and textbooks, technology, staff development. Those are the first three things cut
Yep.
with the recession hit, and they have not been restored, not
Yep.
even at the level we had them in 2008. And so I don't
Right.
think the parents understand, or taxpayers understand, that
No.
penny wise has been a pound foolish in the Wake County and across the state of North Carolina. So Angie, we need to, I could talk to you all morning
I know.
because you are brilliant and fascinating. And I hope that somebody is seeing you as a shining example of thousands and thousands and thousands of teachers across North Carolina who care about your profession, who care about our kids, and you're really working every day to make a difference. And I want to kind of leave with ask you a question that was submitted, which is, if you, what do you wish parents understood better about teaching today? And same thing for lawmakers. What would you wish that lawmakers better understood?
I think that public education institutions are the most critical institutions for the maintenance and security of our republic. We have democratized our republic over time and given the power to the people to drive a lot of our institutions. And so a strong democracy depends upon rock solid education in the people, and to be able to think critically and carefully. And we cannot disinvest in these institutions right now. And that is what we are doing. When Wake County spends $3.8 million a month to go to choice related institutions, instead of investing in our public institutions, we are just disinvesting in the most important institutions in our society. And we've got to quit systematically doing that. And it's literally a national security issue at this point. I do believe it's at that level. So in 1983, the Nation at Risk report was written and in some ways created a lot of the school choice environment. What I would say is that we need to revive the notion that the nation is at risk, but it's really not about creating choice environment anymore. It's about creating strong community-based institutions that serve the needs of all of our students and help them become the critical thinkers that we need to sustain our republic going forward. So similar message, but a very different set of issues that we need to embrace. And I just want to really reiterate Nicole Hannah-Jones, and her takeaways are my takeaways about that. And so we need controlled choice. There is a way to do choice that provides some options for parents to meet the needs of their children, but does not exacerbate the divisions of race and class that our current choice models do. So I think Justin Parmenter is going to be talking a little bit about what some controlled choice options might look like. And so choice is not bad, but I think we see that uncontrolled choice is really not going to serve any of us well going forward.
And there's been several studies that show not only is it not academically improving, it doesn't improve social experiences of children, it's not cost effective, and so it doesn't meet any of the criteria of, if we were evaluating it objectively as a program, it's not the right approach. We've had economist Helen Ladd prove that over and over again. I think we'll end with that. But Angie, this has been a fascinating discussion. We appreciate you sharing with us today. And I think that one of the things that is really important for us to all think about, and I do every day, is that I literally, I think I wake up thinking about public education and our schools almost every day of my life. I wake up thinking about something that's worrying me or frustrating me or making me angry, because I really know that what saved my life was knowing that no matter where I went, where I entered, where I lived, that I could walk into any school and I was going to be accepted. I could walk into any classroom and I would be taken care of by the teachers. So I think that value of having a strong, well-funded, diverse, integrated public school system is a vision that our forefathers had. John Adams had it. Somebody in North Carolina in 1840 opened the first public school and put it into North Carolina's Constitution. So we know that we're not the first ones to think that this is something really important, but we are the generation that must get this back on track and protect our schools, because I really feel like, and if the things continue as they are with vouchers and charters, many rural communities, many suburban communities will no longer have a strong public school system. And public education was set up at the beginning of this country, at the beginning of this state, to serve the common good. It was not a private good. It was to serve everyone, regardless of their income, and it was to be collectively shared. That we all paid in to the system for the community's well good. But we cannot, as Nicole Hannah-Jones, will end with her. She reminds us over and over again that we cannot continue to act as if the choices for our children have no bearing on other children and their access to an equitable education. And if we have to kind of at some point decide that we have a role in protecting public education as a common good, and that we have to make sure the lawmakers join us in that mission and goal. So thank you. We're recording this. We're going to post it on our website. And as I end, I have to say that you know the drill. Everybody, if you're watching, listening, please like us on Facebook, and follow us on Twitter. Join our newsletter on the website. Sign up for our newsletter. This is how we can get the word out and share information and keep our citizens engaged. So Angie, thank you for your Saturday morning. Thank you for
Thank
your
you for your
service.
hard work in every aspect, Yvonne.
Well, I am Red for Ed forever.
I think that's
And
clear.
when I tell my own personal life story, it always talks about the teacher who saved my life, the teacher who paid for me to take the SAT, the teacher who helped me study, the teacher who helped me apply for college, and when I had no resources in my family to help me with that. So, I know the value of one caring adult. And when that's your teacher, there's nothing more valuable. So thank you for everything you do. Have a great
Thank you.
Saturday, and I'll talk to you soon.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
thank you. Bye.
Bye.